Hello again. In this last section, we're going to briefly talk about the third element of the framework. Let's call it marketing orientation. And the first two factors of the framework talked about the disruption that is taken in the marketing media place and the all the new privacy and anti-tracking changes that are being introduced. And the combination of these two factors creates a lot of confusion and a lot of contradiction. It's making it harder for companies to even agree in terms of how to run marketing, and how to approach some important trade-offs. And some of them we discussed earlier. For instance, there is a trade-off of whether companies should go, let's call it broad and aim to drive penetration, or to go narrow and focus on certain segments. Another trade-off is whether they should go long and aim to build brand equity, or they should just go short in terms of the horizon and aim to drive immediate conversions. Now, as we saw earlier, the rise of digital creates more tension in some of these areas. And the problem is that these tensions sometimes exist even inside the same company. So for instance, if I'm responsible for brand marketing, I'm much more likely to think that digital is causing an increased focus on efficiency, which in the end is mortgaging the future of my brand. On the other hand, if I'm responsible for performance, I may tend to think that brand marketing is not really providing any tangible value and that there are better ways for me to use my media dollars, right? In a similar way, companies are also not clear in terms of what drives ROI. So industry studies have been conducted in the past and had provided some evidence in terms of the importance of, in this case, creative. You can see with the light blue on the right side of these two pie charts. Now, yeah, if you compare those two studies, one from 2006 and one from 2017, you start seeing a trend that the role of creative is kind of going down, and the role of media with the yellow bar, with the yellow slice, is going up. Now, unfortunately, as you can see, both of these studies are pretty dated. I mean, 2017 is the most recent one. And especially considering how fast things are moving, in the last few years, things have changed a lot. So we really need a new study with the same methodology. And while this is not yet available, there was a marketing study that was conducted in 2021, but this was more about perception. So the question was based on a survey, and it asked companies what they think is the contribution of each element. So this is, again, not the actual, but it's more about what marketers perceive, which is still important to kind of understand in terms of what's driving ROI. So as you can see on this pie, and if we were to add the two yellow slices with media allocation and targeting, one would conclude that, again, you see that the yellow is kind of increasing, and that on average, marketers tend to think that media and targeting now account for, if not the lion's share of ROI, at least kind of the lion's share in terms of like combined with in comparison with the other two. The big caveat again is that this study is reflecting perceptions and not reality. But in the end, one of the questions that each one of us who works in campaign effectiveness measurement needs to answer is this: are companies aligned internally when it comes to how they drive growth? If they are, it means that there is a consistent and unified way of defining and measuring success. Which also means that our work becomes more straightforward. Now, the quick answer that you can see on the screen, according to a 2022 study among marketers, is that 2/3 of marketers claim to be very aligned in terms of some of these issues. So I think it's the good news. Unfortunately, a closer look reveals a different picture. It looks like the senior decision makers on the left, CMOs and the second in command, tend to overestimate the degree of their internal alignment, right? And on the other hand, their teams who deal with the day-to-day realities of execution seem to be less in agreement in terms of the overall alignment in terms of how they drive growth. But in the end, it looks like there are two main schools of thought when it comes to marketing growth, and they split right in the middle. on the one hand, we have what we call the go long, go broad purists. And the purist is a key word here because, these are mostly senior marketers with a very strong conviction that it all comes down to the traditional principles of building brand, aiming for higher reach and increasing penetration. And on the other hand, we have another group that we call the pragmatic balancers. And these are mid-senior marketers who take advantage of modern marketing opportunities. They are closer to the day-to-day realities of execution, and they choose to balance different approaches. They say, well, reach is good, but at the same time, some of these targeting approaches work as well. So I have to kind of be more balancing in terms of including both elements in my campaign. Now, I'd like to take a quick moment and ask all of you who are watching to think and see in which group you think you identify with the most. So once you've done that, the other question is that regardless of that, the truth is that you probably work with people from both camps, right? And that really adds to the complexity of our job because it makes it harder to agree, with our team in terms of what makes a successful campaign, and to also agree on the metrics and the process to measure it. Okay. So to summarize in this section, companies are not aligned internally in terms of what drives growth. Different schools of thought exist, often in the same company, and misalignment exists also in terms of campaign goals and metrics, and that makes it much harder at the end of the day to assess if a campaign was effective or not, and to agree on a common kind of way that we see the world. Okay, so bringing it all together, we have now covered each of the three areas of the framework. Let's kind of try to bring it all together. The goal of this lecture was to accomplish three things. One, to provide a framework to help you monitor and understand disruption. Two, to talk about implications for campaign effectiveness and campaign effectiveness measurement. And three, to discuss about how marketers should be approaching the future of effectiveness measurement. Now, during the course of the lecture, we introduced this framework with the three factors. On the first one, we talked about some of the key changes that are happening in the media ecosystem. We talked about CTV, we talked about mobile, we talked about retail media, among other things. We talked about walled gardens. And I hope it was clear that disruptive change will continue to influence the ecosystem as new media options become available at scale. The implication here for campaign effectiveness is that marketers will need to actively track how the media ecosystem is changing and to kind of continue to do test and learn in order to understand effectiveness and to make sure that the organization is positioned for the new landscape. On the second force, which was privacy and regulation, we talk about a lot of the changes that are happening there. And clearly, there's a lot of tension that is being created because of that. And the main challenge for marketers is that these changes really create a need for a whole new skill set, one that is much more technical in areas of regulation, in areas of ad tech, and in areas of data science. The implication for campaign effectiveness and campaign effectiveness measurement is that marketers will need to increasingly focus on durable measurement solutions and to work and to invest more time and resources in terms of getting to a unified understanding of campaign effectiveness. Lastly, we briefly discussed the implications of the first two factors on marketing orientation of a company. And we highlighted that there's oftentimes a problem of alignment internally in terms of what drives success and how to measure it. And while it's not easy to ensure that campaign effectiveness measurement stays aligned with marketing orientation of the organization, the main recommendation here is to at least be aware of the gap that exists, and it does exist, because oftentimes it creates a translation problem when it comes to delivering results of a test and aligning in terms of how a campaign performed.